Hello and welcome. So, I'm talking today about coping strategies and dealing with anxiety. Really excited about this. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Claire Snowdon-Darling, founder of Balance Wellness, where I've spent 14 years, I can't believe it's 14 years, 14 years creating, people joining, alternative health protocols to deal with health and mental health issues. And more recently, I have become the head of the College of Functional Wellness, which is a college that I started with my business partner, the wonderful Laura Knowles, to deliver accredited practitioner training in the methods that we have created. So we now have accredited practitioner pathways, which is really exciting, specifically in health and emotional health. So we now have a big selection of both online training courses and also in-person training courses. And those are for people who are just generally interested in health and want to know a little bit more, or people who actually are considering going on a career change to become a practitioner. We're very excited about that. It's all happening, yeah, I am particularly excited about seeing work that I've been developing for a long time now actually getting out into the world. And the real dream is, the more people that we can help, because we are in the middle of a global crisis. And part of that crisis is a huge increase in anxiety. So anxiety is the #1 emotional issue we see in clinic. Anti-anxiety medication is one of the most commonly prescribed drugs in the UK. A total of 70.9 million prescriptions for antidepressants were dispensed in England in 2018, which is double the number that were prescribed in 2008. I mean, I think that's a shocking amount. But this is where I get quite passionate, because we can't just look at people are anxious, it must be them. We have to start looking at why we're seeing such a massive increase and stop thinking of this as individual issues. So we can just fix somebody with a pill, as opposed to what is going on socially. That means our society is struggling with anxiety. Obviously, we are in 2021 right now, and anxiety has peaked during the pandemic. And a lot of people are feeling very isolated, very bored, very overwhelmed, a lot of fear around, just other humans, the virus itself, breaking rules. There's just fear at every turn, and the media is absolutely, it's in the government's interest that we have that fear, because then we'll follow the rules. So it's just at us all the time. I did a really quick search for anxiety increase during COVID, and there were literally dozens and dozens and dozens of pages of new medical research, headlines. It is definitely, I think, the biggest cofactor in the pandemic. And on top of the overwhelm and things, we've also got people grieving, we've got financial pressure. It is coming at us from all sides right now. So when I was thinking about how to do this talk, I thought, let's actually just really break it down. So what is anxiety? It was interesting because my daughter earlier was talking to me about panic attacks, and I said, that's interesting, because I don't put panic attacks and anxiety in the same category. They can have the same source, but they become often different things. And we end up having a conversation about it. So anxiety sounds like it's to do with worry and panic, and is often tied up with people having a nervous disposition, some timidity. Often we think of anxious people. There's almost like what's the word I'm looking for? A stereotype of the anxious person. And whilst that is true for some people, it's definitely not always the case. And I, for example, never thought that I had anxiety. It just wasn't my bag. My business partner is very open about how she's dealt with anxiety, particularly about speaking in public. I didn't have any of that. I've always been very sort of out there, confident person. And I was like, well, I don't have anxiety, until actually I started doing some really big work on anxiety and realized that mine manifested in different ways. So I actually think that everyone has anxiety. It just manifests for some people, and some people recognize it more than others. Now, obviously, the people who recognize it, that's really challenging, and we need to find ways of dealing with it. But I actually think it's even, in some ways, more dangerous for the people who don't recognize they have it, because they're not asking for help. They're not owning it. They're not asking for help. It's not even on their radar. So symptoms, some surprising symptoms of anxiety. And of course, these can be associated with other things, but some surprising symptoms include a general fatigue. And actually, that for me was one of the flags when I started looking into this, because I had chronic fatigue after a very traumatic delivery of my daughter 17 years ago. So I had chronic fatigue syndrome for 15 years. So when I actually had to start looking at, is it just chronic fatigue syndrome? Because it's really easy to sit in a diagnosis, I suppose is the word, but actually what's really going on. And when I started realizing that I was just operating at a low level of anxiety all the time, that can be a huge drain on your nervous system. Disturbed sleep. So if you have got constant circling thoughts, but you think you're on it, I thrive with stress, I'm fine. Actually, just that is often anxiety disguising itself as thriving on stress. Of course, it could it could be that your sleep is disturbed because you're anxious, but some people don't realize that they're anxious. Or the common one is, no, I really enjoy it. No, I thrive on it. Actually, none of us thrive on it. An inability to concentrate, that's an interesting one, because again, we can put that down to a lot of other things, but an underlying issue can be anxiety. Restlessness, so I can't relax, can't just sit down and switch off. Okay, why? What's going on? Obsessive thoughts, so not just the disturbed sleep from circling thoughts, but obsessive thoughts. This was actually one that I had, which was just one of my favorite examples was building up to a big Christmas dinner. It would be 6-7 weeks before the big Christmas dinner that I'd be thinking about, okay, well, what food do I need, and when do we need to start baking the mince pies, and when are we going to do that, and what about when am I going to wrap presents? And I'll put all those dates in my diary to make sure that I don't forget. But the constant. And I remember even saying to my ex-husband, right, okay, so we're going to do the mince pies on this day, and he would get to the point where he said, you've told me 6 times when we're going to be baking mince pies. Have I? It was that constant going over lists in my head and reciting things in my head. Okay, so that and that and that and that and that. And it's the anxiety underneath that is, I'm going to drop the ball, I'm going to forget something, it's all going to be wrong, it's going to be my fault, all of those kind of things. So obviously worrying and generalized worrying. Another really interesting one is being irritable and reactive. So being snappy. It's such a sign that someone is processing anxiety. There are physical symptoms, increased heart rate and palpitations. We would consider that more with a panic attack, but actually just generally being a bit fluttery, being a bit sort of low level sweaty. I know if anyone's going through menopause, this also sounds like menopause, but anxiety is exacerbated in menopause because of the drop off of progesterone, which I'm going to talk about later. Trembling or shaking. And I mean, I've really seen clients who have this constant sort of shaking in their hands, or this constant need to fidget. And that really highlights to me sort of, I guess in old fashioned terms, we'd call it a nervous disposition, but that there's an anxiety fueling a lot of processes. Feelings of impending doom, and these can be very non-specific. So that was one of mine, and it was just even hearing an email ping in, my instant thought would be, oh God, what am I going to have to deal with? What do I have to deal with? And it's one of my favorite descriptions is, it's like I'm waiting for the tap on the shoulder. Something's coming. And lastly on my list, overwhelm. So just this feeling of I am massively overwhelmed, I'm drowning in everything I've got to do, I can't do it, and I just feel like I'm drowning. That overwhelm, and often then procrastination. But underneath it can be a lot of anxiety. At the extreme end is generalized anxiety disorder, which can be extremely life affecting and is put in the same category as the obsessive compulsive disorders. And that definitely requires specialist treatment. However, there's an awful lot of stuff that we're talking about today. If you do fall into that category, that is going to help. And I do work with people, I have worked with people with both obsessive compulsive disorder and generalized anxiety. And I like to see that what I do is the foundations, and then they also do, have the specialist help. Things like panic attacks are when anxiety has got to a point where there are no coping strategies. And so we've gone into a panic attack. And so hopefully, my intention is that the work that I've done in this talk is going to help stop people getting to the point of panic attacks. And then there are actually an awful lot of mechanisms out there for panic attacks, but I'm not going to go into those specifically today. But my daughter said to me she likes to do maths projects, math sums in her head, and those are actually great. I mean, I hear about breathing techniques and people singing in their head and maths, and it's anything to take yourself away from the physiological response that's happening. So the thing with anxiety, and this is a theme that I hear over and over again, and something I am so passionate about breaking through, is it's so easy to think of anxiety as an issue or a demon, and it's something that we can't control, and it's something that we just desperately want to get away from or not have. However, that's not realistic. Anxiety is part of us. All of our feelings are part of us. And a lot of therapies try to take us away from our feelings as opposed to try and help us learn how to be with them. And I've definitely, our work definitely goes down the how do we be with this part of ourselves? I actually like to think of anxiety a little differently. And I say this having worked with thousands of people, all of whom have experienced anxiety in one form or another at varying times, even if they don't know that they're experiencing it. I now believe that anxiety is in fact our superpower, and it's our intuition that we've been taught to ignore. So I want you to imagine that at some point there was a whisper, but we didn't know how to listen to that whisper internally. And so then that whisper became a bit of a louder whisper. And then it became like a stage whisper. And then it became this voice. And then it became this. And then it became this. And then it's literally screaming at us, by which point we now think it's an issue that we need to try and shut down, as opposed to learning there's something I need to pay attention to here. So we live in a society where we're told by the powers that be to ignore our own inner guidance. It's literally what we're taught from birth. We're taught by parents because we need to behave, for those of us who are parents, we need our kids to put their shoes on and go to school. But that is often overriding the child's inner guidance system. We're taught by teachers, we're taught by our bosses, we're taught by doctors, we're taught by governments. It's not about creating a collective of autonomous adults. It's about learning how to be in society. That actually is one of the reasons why I believe, when we go back to why is everyone suffering from anxiety, is because we've switched off our inner guidance systems so deeply. Our intuition and knowing how to act on our intuition is the key to making us confident, opinionated, assertive, and autonomous, as opposed to anxious, afraid of conflict, passive or passive aggressive, and with a kind of a sheep following mentality out of fear. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has to stand up and be a rebel. I quite like that a little bit, but I'm not saying that that's how people, that's me personally. That's not what other people need to do. But when we learn to listen to our own inner guidance system, that anxiety we can start to discover is our friend. And for people who experience anxiety, badly and it's quite life affecting, I understand that that can feel like a leap. So if our anxiety is our superpower, and if it's our witch sense telling us something's not okay, what does that mean we have to do? Well, this is where sometimes it becomes a little bit difficult, because now we have to start asking ourselves some difficult questions, and we don't want to ask ourselves those difficult questions. We don't really necessarily want to look at it. So maybe it's our relationship with food that we need to look at. Maybe it's our relationship with ourselves. Maybe we're in a lot of self-criticism because, maybe we had very critical parenting or critical siblings. Maybe we've got a dependency on alcohol. Maybe we're in a relationship that we actually know isn't the relationship that we would be in if we could, to start again and choose it. The anxiety is often asking us to look at those things, and we don't want to. So I'm a really big believer in living from a place of radical honesty. And sometimes the conversation just needs to be with the anxiety and say, yeah, I'm not prepared to look at that now. I'm going to put a pin in it. Knowing that there is sometimes stuff that we need to look at, but it's not the right time, isn't just procrastinating. Sometimes that's deep wisdom. But the real wisdom there is having a conversation with the anxiety. Every time it's like rearing its head going, I know that conversation's coming. I just don't feel that the time is right, or whatever it might be. One of my other favorite questions is, what if this feeling isn't mine? Now, that might sound a little bit crazy, but we are a collective. And, our intuition doesn't just give us, sort of guidance to our inner feelings. Our intuition and our empathy allows us to tap into what's going on around us. It's one of the really advanced safety mechanisms we have as animals, is the ability to tune in, to read a room energetically, I suppose, vibrationally. Often, the feeling might not be yours. What if it's someone else in the house? What if it's somebody else's? It might be yours. But if you actually start asking yourself that question, what if this feeling isn't mine? What if I'm picking up on the collective? You might be a lot more empathetic than you knew. And you're starting to feel the collective consciousness. So now you can ask a different question. Okay, how do I choose to feel about this thing? There might be some elements of it that I'm quite concerned about, but that's okay. I can note down those concerns and I can see how to work through those strategically. But what if this free fall anxiety and panic isn't mine, or isn't how I choose to feel? If that feels like a stretch, what tools can we use to get you there? So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. There are, however, some very basic reasons as to why anxiety can get out of control. And in my world as a health coach and kinesiologist, we work with what we call the 4 realms. And these 4 realms are basically there aren't any more than 4 realms. There aren't 5 realms, there's only 4. And any condition can stem from or live in one or more of the 4 realms. So these realms are the biochemical, the emotional, the electrical, and the structural. And in my work, we offer solutions for all the realms so that we're not leaving any stone unturned when it comes to finding the path to wellness. But I'm going to talk about them all individually. So let's start with the biochemical. It's one of my favorites. And it always surprises people, particularly with anxiety, when I start with the biochemical, because surely anxiety is an emotional issue. And yes, that's where it manifests. But actually, I think most anxiety starts in the biochemical. So diet has a massive implication in anxiety. Food is a vital biochemical element here. Every time we eat, we have a hormonal response. Now, that might not really land until you realize that every single emotion stems from hormones. So if every time we eat, we have a hormonal response and our emotions are created by hormones, surely there's a connection. So we call this the hashtag emotion health connection. It's massive. And when people start to make the connection that what I'm eating every time I eat is either causing my hormones to take me to a place of wellness, calm, fulfillment, or anxiety, inflammation, stress. So what causes what? Well, when we eat a carbohydrate-rich diet or eat sporadically or eat food we're intolerant to, which would commonly be gluten, milk, and sugar, there are others, but those are the most common. They're what I call the gateway allergens. We produce the stress hormone cortisol. So as soon as we eat that, we have to produce cortisol. So cortisol is the stress hormone. Now, cortisol's job is to put sugar into our muscles to make us be able to run, to get away from danger. So saber-toothed tiger behind us, cortisol into the bloodstream and muscles. Now we have the energy to run away. It's really that basic. So that happens when we either eat a lot of sugar and carbohydrates or when we eat something we're intolerant to. So that sugar release then stimulates insulin. So cortisol spikes our blood sugars because the sugar's gone into our blood. And as soon as it hits a certain point, we release insulin. Now, the problem is insulin insulin does a lot of jobs, one of which is fat storage. So this is why people with a lot of anxiety can often, though people either lose a lot of weight or they can hold on to a lot of weight, but holding on to a lot of weight is because of insulin, and it's because we're going to fat storage. So once we've got insulin, sadly, insulin doesn't take us back to where our blood sugars should be. It takes us back to where we came from. So we're down here. So now we're going to produce more cortisol. We're in this blood sugar roller coaster. So that blood sugar roller coaster, our bodies think we're under attack because we are literally in a blood sugar roller coaster. It's the only way I can describe it, a massive imbalance. So our body's going, I don't know, food's coming, now I've got too much sugar, I don't know what to do. So we've got this internal war going on. That is a stressor for our body. So that is going to cause anxiety because our body thinks it's under attack. So if we think we're under attack because of our diet, how are we going to have the right emotional, what's the word I'd use, scaffolding in place to be calm? We can't. It's not biologically impossible. It's biochemically impossible. So when I talk about a carbohydrate-rich diet, yes, I'm talking about refined carbohydrates like crisps and sweets and cake and all the things that people think about. But surprisingly, I'm also talking about things that we would consider to be really good for us. Root vegetables, grains, legumes. Then, of course, there's the alcohol, the fizzy drinks. Fruit comes into that. So carbohydrates are, but basically, I'm going to talk a little bit more about them. But carbohydrates can be a lot of those foods. So if we're having, let's say, a risotto that's like got loads of butternut squash and sweet potato, and it sounds delicious, then I'm going to have a fruit salad afterwards. You've just had a load of carbohydrates, but you actually haven't had enough proteins and fats to balance your blood sugars, and therefore you will end up in a blood sugar roller coaster. It's like people are often really surprised by that, and that we have to get those foundations in place as an actual coping strategy for anxiety. So when we eat, we must eat a balance of protein, fats, and carbohydrates. So we call that eating PFC. So every meal, PFC, protein, fats, and carbs. So by protein, I mean meat, fish, eggs, protein powders, and tofu. And by protein powders, I'm not talking whey protein powders because they can cause a lot of inflammation because they'd be in the dairy category, which people are intolerant to. I'd be talking about vegan protein powders such as rice, hemp, and pea. Every meal. So if you're having your porridge, pimp it out with some protein powder. Have a couple of hard-boiled eggs on the side. If you're having toast, hopefully by now not wheat, but maybe spelt or gluten-free, loads of butter, peanut butter, but where's the protein? We need protein. Our fats would be considered Cheese, I prefer you having organic cheese, nuts, avocado, seeds, oils, olives, butter, then the good old-fashioned fats like tallow, lard, those are all, bone stock jelly, those are all really, really good fats that we need to have in our diet. And, you know, we're seeing since was it the 70s and 80s when they decided that fat made you fat, which was the most ridiculous science, like it was ridiculous, it wasn't founded on anything. We actually now know, you know, we've been seeing since then nothing but an increase in obesity and depression and anxiety as people have been, you know, cutting out low fat diets have just caused so much ill health in the human race. So we need fats. Fats are really good for us, especially, well, men need them too, but especially women, because it's actually how we're going to make our hormones. Then we could talk about the carbohydrates. So there's the two types of carbohydrates. There's the non-starchy carbohydrates, like I'm making a C. C for carbohydrate. There's the non-starchy carbohydrates. That's all of our leafy greens. It would be our salads. It would be our cruciferous vegetables, you know, our brassicas. We need to eat those abundantly. They're low in sugar. Fill your boots. And they're also, we're going to get a lot of phytonutrients, lots of lovely fiber, juicy and delicious. But then we come to the starchy carbohydrates. So that would be, like I said, your grains and beans, your fruit, your root vegetables, and all the treats, where all the fun in the world lives. So we need our starches because that's how we're going to produce serotonin, which are lovely, you know, the calming hormones and joyful hormones, and all the fun in the world is in the carbohydrate section. I'm not going to lie. So we choose one per meal, or one serving per meal, which is about a half a cup serving. So if it's a big banana, you're looking at half a banana. If it's a big potato, you're looking at half a potato per meal. So for more information on that, we've got a PFC meal planner, and also a load of recipes which have been created for us by the most wonderful chef, and you can actually get that as a pack, just the two of those things, the recipe pack and the meal planner, on our website balancedwellness.co.uk. So that is how we need to eat as a foundation for keeping anxiety under control. If you want to learn more about how hormones affect our diet, we actually have a 3-hour masterclass on balanced wellness, and this is the foundation of all the work that I've done. And you know, when I first trained, we sort of talked a little bit about hormones, but not in any great depth. So I just had a little message on there about the website. So thank you. It's balancedwellness.co.uk. And we have literally a load of lectures on there, so including hormone masterclass. There's loads of bits and pieces that we've been creating. So another part of the reason that why we have to get our biochemistry right is our soils are massively depleted. Our food is very aggressively farmed, and as such, it is devoid of the essential minerals that support mood. So magnesium is the mood elevator. There are so many types, so find the right one for you. It's in fact, you can check out our social media. We actually have little guides that talk about the right magnesium. And by our guides, that I mean the Balanced Wellness UK social media on Instagram and Facebook. I'll talk a bit at the end about where to get involved. Magnesium is absolutely essential for mood stabilization. It's also essential for blood sugar regulation, hormone regulation, and reducing stress. It's essential. It does over 300 jobs in the body. Women need a lot more of it than men do. It's also likely that you will be magnesium deficient if you're eating wheat. So wheat is an anti-nutrient that actually stops you absorbing magnesium. So wheat intolerance is a big, big issue. I do talk about wheat as an issue a lot, but it's not all glutens that are horrendous unless you're actually celiac. A lot of people do have what we call a gluten cross sensitivity. So the body just looks at rye or barley and goes, looks too much like wheat, I can't tolerate it. But the real issue is wheat, and it's because we hybrid the grain, the gluten content went up like tenfold, and then we started spraying it with a pesticide called glyphosate, which is an antibacterial but non-discriminatory. So it literally strips out our gut microbiome, because our gut microbiome is predominantly bacteria, and it starts to cause an awful lot of inflammation and issues. So we actually have a lot of research now that shows that there is in a rich carbohydrate diet, the bacteria in our bowel give off something called endotoxins. And the research shows that in the blood tests of people that have depression and suicidal thoughts, they have elevated levels of endotoxins. So we're starting to see that food has a direct correlation with our mood. I found that really, really interesting. So we also need to reduce the cortisol biochemically. Now, we can't just reduce cortisol and stress because, I mean, for a start, we're living through a pandemic right now, and just it's stressful. It's stressful for everybody. And I just, life is stressful. So there are things that we can control and there are things we can't control. One of the reasons that I like to bang on about diet is because we can control diet. We can control eating foods we're intolerant to. We can control quite a few things. But one of the things that we can control to reduce cortisol is we can take a herbal adaptogen. Now, as with always, if people are on medications, you need to get that signed off from the doctor. But for most people, we can get on a herbal adaptogen. Now, adaptogens are really clever. You might have heard the phrase adaptogenic herbs. Adaptogens are really clever. There's a stress process that happens in the body, where there's a signal that goes from our brain to our adrenal glands, which is we're under stress, make cortisol. And so the adrenal glands make the cortisol, and then they send a little memo back to say, oh, I've done it, stop sending the memo. But what happens is that signal was for something that happened 20 minutes ago, and so now we need more cortisol. And after a while, this feedback loop, stop sending the memo, just gets switched off. It just doesn't bother. So what adaptogenic herbs do is they come into the body and they actually rebalance that memo system, as it were. So our body can go, okay, I don't need to make cortisol all the time. I can actually do it in relation to things that are appropriate, because, going back to my example of an email would ping in and I would be like this, that is definitely a sign of the body being in a massive cortisol overwhelm. So again, it's, they're all great. You hear about a new one every single month. People go on about Shazandra and ashwagandha and tulsi and neem. They're all amazing. I love them all equally, but it's important to get on the right one for you. And if you haven't had a wow from the one that you're on, or you felt a bit overstimulated, it was the wrong one. So again, the right one is important. So either find a practitioner to support you, or we have created the most incredible toolkits that actually have the most gorgeous checklists that help you find the right one. So for that, again, you can access that through Balance Wellness, but we actually have a website called symptomassessor.co.uk. Really, really clever. That's what we spent the first pandemic doing, creating this really clever little thing, which is a questionnaire. It takes a couple of minutes to do, and it'll ask you about sort of conditions or symptoms that you have, and then it tells you which hormone pathway that you need to focus on. And then there are toolkits available to you, which actually have the PFC in them, they have the hormone masterclass in them, and they also have the right supplements for where you're at. We're very proud of all of it. So another biochemical reason for anxiety is that our sex hormones are out of balance. So if we have too much estrogen, we will end up with anxiety. There is a big connection. So ways to get your estrogen balanced are to clean up your toxic chemical exposure to cleaning products, toiletries, those kind of things. They are actually in a genre of chemicals called endocrine disruptor chemicals. So your endocrine is your hormone system. So these are actually called endocrine disruptors. So we need to clean them up. And when I started doing this a long time ago, organic products was, firstly, organic food was, really expensive and hard to find. Organic products were super expensive and hard to find. They're everywhere now. So, and so much cheaper. So we can, start to make those transitions and changes. This is why it's also important to clean up processed food, because those processed foods are estrogenic, and getting rid of, our exposure to plastics. The reason that people go on about plastics is because it's estrogenic. So estrogen toxicity or estrogen dominance is behind a lot of obesity. It's why we're seeing, women who have put on a lot of weight with the enormous boobs, enormous hips, men with the man boobs, with moobs. That's all because it's an estrogen imbalance. Now, estrogen imbalances get worse in perimenopause. And that's because we stop making progesterone. That's the first, big thing in menopause, is we stop making progesterone. So now we have estrogen, like estrogen fluctuates, but either way, there's always more estrogen than progesterone. And that's why we have the weight gain. It's also why we have the anxiety. So something I would like to talk to you about, which happens as well before perimenopause. So I'm often talking about this particular issue with women in their early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. It's not just your ovaries that make progesterone. Now, progesterone is our calming hormone. It's what makes the world feel great. It's what helps us to sleep. It's what helps us to wind down. It's just the most gorgeous hormone. However, it's not just made in our ovaries, it's also made in our adrenal glands. And I talked to you about those earlier because they're the ones that make stress hormones. So this is a clue. We have a hormone that makes progesterone. It's called pregnenolone. You're not going to get tested on this later. But pregnenolone makes progesterone. Interestingly, pregnenolone is made from cholesterol, good fats. And this is why we need fats in our diet. Fat makes progesterone, well, pregnenolone. Pregnenolone makes progesterone. Unless, now, let's think about what progesterone is. Progesterone, broken down, means progestation hormone. It is the hormone that thickens the uterus lining. It gets us ready to hold and carry a baby. That's what progesterone does. But not just that. It does all this calming, delicious juiciness as well and helping us sleep. Is it more important, if there's a saber-toothed tiger behind us, to thicken the uterus lining to hold and carry a baby, or is it more important to run away? It's more important to run away. So instead of the pregnenolone making progesterone, guess what? It will make cortisol instead. Now, I am seeing very young women going into this. This is something that you can Google it. It's called the pregnenolone steal. It's a bit of a misnomer because the pregnenolone is not stealing anything, but it's called the pregnenolone steal. And it's basically where the body chooses to make cortisol over progesterone. And we're seeing this all the time now. It's because people are so stressed. So we absolutely, that's another reason then that we end up estrogen dominant, is because we're not making enough progesterone. So not just at menopause, we're seeing it earlier. And this is another reason biochemically for this anxiety. So cleaning up our diets, cleaning up our toxic chemicals, reducing exposure to foods that we're intolerant to. These are all biochemical ways. Make sure you drink enough water as well. That's a stressor. I want us to think about every time we do something, is it an internal stressor? Because it doesn't need to be a saber-toothed tiger behind us. It could just be, I haven't drunk enough water. I haven't drunk 2 liters of still clean water. My body is in stress. So we have to start thinking about what is causing us this stress. I like to think of my body, such delicate nubbin. Have I eaten right today? Have I drunk enough water? Have I had enough, time without screens? It's really basic, actually. But modern life has meant that we can't do this stuff so easily. So we have to be incredibly mindful. So that's the biochemical reasons. So I'm just going to talk to you now about the electrical realm. Sounds a bit weird, but let's check it out. So our body and brains run on electricity. That's how a muscle fires, electrical signal from the brain to the muscle. And our symptoms can be made a lot worse when we aren't able to pay attention to the electricity in our bodies. So first of all, think of all the exposure we have to EMF radiation right now. That's just like everywhere, isn't it? It's on our screens, it's on our laptops, it's in our electricity, on our lighting, EMF everywhere. So that will have an impact on how our bodies are running. So again, that can ramp up our anxiety. It's like we've got a bandwidth, literally like Wi-Fi. And if our body is, now we're having to take up a chunk of this bandwidth with something I'm intolerant to, and I'm not drinking enough water, and my diet's not quite right. Now I've got the electricity. I haven't got any bandwidth left. Like, we literally have to think of it like this. So the other thing is, often if we're feeling anxious and we're just a little bit like, we look for a distraction. I'm going to talk about those in a minute. And so what do we start doing? I'm going to scroll through Instagram. I'm going to scroll through something. And I'm just holding on to this screen constantly. Now I'm attached to it. And it's part of my, put like a limb. So when we're attached to our devices and screens, we are affecting our body's neural pathways and hormone creation. And particularly the hormones there are melatonin and serotonin. So melatonin is the hormone that calms us down to sleep, and serotonin is the wake up and feel good. Excuse that noise, that's my dog trying to get in. He can't. He hasn't got fingers, can't open the door handle. So we do have to learn electrically to be mindful of what's going on around us. And this is where it's very important to, instead of just watching the TV, get out into the garden, get some fresh air, get some light exposure, natural light. Don't just mindlessly scroll on the internet. We have to, it's so hard sometimes to drag ourselves away, I know, but it is much, much better for our bodies electrically. This is also where things like yoga come in, because, in yoga, the breathing that changes the electrical flow of the body. Some of those mudras are about changing polarity and electricity in the body. And so are the asanas, like the way that we're, the movements are designed to change the electricity in our body. Crystals, this is where all this comes in. And movement, those all change the electrical pathways in the body. Water is also electrical because the brain works by electricity. So the brain works by the electricity, and water is the conductor. So we need those 2 liters of water a day for the electrical realm as well. So let's look emotionally now. And I do like starting with those two. And like now we're here at emotional, which is quite far down the list. So you can already see how we've taken up that bandwidth with the other bits and pieces. Specifically, now let's talk about the coping strategies. And I want to talk about the difference between a coping strategy and a survival strategy. So a survival strategy is there to numb us and distract us and take us away from the feeling. Now, survival strategies would be denial. Oh, no, I'm fine. Blame. So blaming, oh, it's just that really busy day at work, or it's your fault because you didn't empty the dishwasher, or self-blame. Oh, I didn't do this, or I'm not good enough at that. Numbing ourselves. These are the classics. Food, especially the chocolate. Chocolate sales have gone up like 40 million pounds worth of chocolate sales, on top of usual sales in the pandemic. That it just shows that, we're grabbing for the feel-good factor. So food, alcohol, shopping, sex is a great numbing thing. Gambling, emotionally withdrawing. These are all ways that we numb ourselves. And actually, there's an opportunity. The anxiety is usually asking us to drop below the numbing. And that does take some real consciousness to go, okay, I'm not just going to mindlessly shop for something. I'm not just going to just comfort eat something. Distractions, that would be our social media, mindless scrolling, TV. Sabotage, self-sabotage, that's a good one, isn't it? So sometimes we'll actually, incite an argument to get us out of a feeling, and that's a numbing technique. Being in the story, so it's so easy, isn't it? Oh, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. That's actually, again, a survival strategy to numb out rather than be with what's real for us. Intellectualizing, well, if I can understand it, then I can fix it. Those are survival strategies. A coping strategy is different, and a coping strategy is a tool to navigate the difficulty. So diet and the right exercise would come under this. I'm going to talk about exercise in a moment. So would having a daily practice. Now, Marianne Williamson, I don't know if you know Marianne Williamson, I absolutely adore her. She is obviously a teacher of spirituality and self-development. She is pretty clear that if you haven't got a daily practice, then you have not got any scaffolding in place. So things like meditating, gratitude journaling, walking in nature, mindfulness, yoga, working with crystals, all of the wonderful holistic things we're all working at making rituals in our lives. We need this discipline is absolutely what holds us in place in times of difficulty. If you're feeling anxious, this is instead of just like scrolling through Netflix or Instagram, I like go to watch really positive people. So I really enjoy watching Russell Brand, his podcasts, Brené Brown, Abraham Hicks, Marianne Williamson, Liz Gilbert. And of course, we do actually have the wonderful Balanced Wellness YouTube channel where you can see Laura and I talking about all sorts of things to do with health and emotions, particularly from our perspective of learning how to journey using them. Just surround yourself with positivity, and that includes relationships, which might be one of the things that your anxiety is asking you to look at, as difficult as it is. So the whole point of doing all of this is what I would consider spiritual work. But the whole point of this is learning to surrender to be with what is. So, according to the wonderful Byron Katie, the source of human conflict is the desire to battle what is versus what I want it to be. So, that would be our ego trying to control something. So, how do we learn to let that go? This is where a discipline is important. And when we have discipline, we don't melt down into panic. So, I mean, I trained as a Kundalini yoga teacher, and that was what they call their spiritual warrior training, because, you're taught these disciplines to hold you together. So I used to have a patchwork of spirituality personally, a bit of yoga here, a bit of meditation, and then I actually developed a daily practice about 4 years ago, and I cannot believe the difference. And it might just be some days I might have an hour and I can be in my practice. And that's not all meditation. There's some reading and there's some bits and pieces. I might only have 5 minutes in the morning to read a paragraph. That's discipline. That's having a practice. But it has dramatically changed how I see the world, and my ability to just be and surrender is vast. So whilst I'm not personally affiliated to any particular religion, I do absolutely adore the Serenity Prayer and often use it as a mantra in a non-secular way. And in fact, we use it every morning in our immersive retreat. And that is, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, this is where our anxiety is our superpower, because by having a conversation with our superpower, it will actually be telling us, I can change that, or I can't change that, and I've now got to go through a process of grief or letting go or whatever. What anxiety usually wants us to do instead is to look outside of ourselves and ask other people for reassurance and help, and actually the journey is to go within. So there are some really great books around this. So I mentioned the wonderful Byron Katie, Byron, and she has a book called Loving What Is. Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, and that is, I mean, awesome. And that was one of those books that sat on my bookshelf for about 10 years. And when I actually picked it up, I went, why didn't I read this sooner? It is very much about, if we're in the now, if we're fully present, we can't be spinning out because we're in the now. And it sounds so simple. It's a lifelong practice. Marianne Williamson's Tears to Triumph is a brilliant book, absolutely brilliant book. I mean, she basically says, if you are alive today and you look out the window and you're not depressed, you're not paying attention. So of course, that is all, if these are now presets. So how do we deal with that? And so that's a great book. And she also then wrote A Return to Love, which is her reflections on A Course in Miracles, which I don't think is necessarily relevant for this particular topic. I mean, it's relevant for all topics, but not specifically. But a really good workbook is Gabrielle Bernstein's 6-week workbook, May Cause Miracles, which is based on the teachings of A Course in Miracles and is fantastic. I mean, and A Course in Miracles, the whole process is about surrender and letting go and forgiveness and the ability to be. But that's like a lifelong process, whereas this is a 6-week workbook, and I started on that a few years back, 2015, and that was a life changer, and I often recommend that to a lot of clients, a lot of students, and I've done it a couple of times myself. The biggest tool, however, for anxiety is self-parenting, and self-parenting is part of the psychology model transactional analysis, and which is a whole body of psychology. And it talks about 3 perceptual positions, that there are three people alive in us. There are many people alive in us at any given moment, but 3 in particular. And that is, at all times, there is a scared child. And at all times, there is an angry teenager. But there is also the possibility of a conscious divine parent or a divine adult. Now, I sort of think that this is what was missing for most of us when we were parented as teenagers, is we go from children and suddenly I'm 18, so I'm supposed to be an adult, but no one's taught me how to do that. It's this transition for, learning how to parent ourselves and stop looking outside of ourselves for someone to help us. So our partner, fill my bowl with love because I can't. We have to learn to do that job. So we have to learn how to converse with and parent that scared child, because that's what your anxiety is. It's that scared child who's trying to say something's not right, something's not right. I need your help. I need your help. Where are you? Where are you? And we can't just blame our parents the rest of our lives. Nobody outside of us can parent us. Only we can learn to do that, because no one can look inside us and see what we need. So self-parenting is the most transformational technique I have ever done, bar none. And it's the one that we teach in our immersive retreats. We teach it to our practitioners. I use it with clients, and we teach it in our online program, Reclaim Your Life, which it's a 10 or 12 hour online program designed to teach you self-parenting, teach you how to learn to be, teach you, how to deal with all of these emotional issues. So the journey, which becomes your daily practice, is to learn how to exercise the muscle of the divine parent, let's call it that ultimate autonomous adult. It's like developing the ultimate compassion, but with some serious boundaries. And a lot of people have issues with boundaries because they don't want to, be confrontational. The anxiety says this is conflict, something bad's going to happen. But actually, when we come from the adult, it's like, no, I can speak non-violently. I can, my needs are, priority here. So my big take home in emotion is learning to listen to anxiety, sit in stillness and journal. Learn to have conversation with your inner voice and parent it. Act on the sage advice it gives you, and then also have the clarity. We have to learn the clarity to temper down when it's being paranoid and go, okay, thank you. That's a little, I can feel that that's coming from fear, but what I hear in that is some real advice that I'm going to take. Okay, yeah, you're right. We need to talk about this. I don't feel brave enough yet. Keep reminding me. So I'm a big fan of a self-love practice, and I promote it to wind down and learn how to listen to your inner voice. And so this is really simple. I say it's simple, but actually, we all struggle with it. Choose 10 things that you can find very self-loving. So it might be a walk in nature, might be a bath, it might be some self-pleasuring, anything. But I say to people, choose 10 things ranging from 10 minutes to an hour. And then your commitment is you're going to do one of those things every single day. Now, when you're in that place of, I'm going to self-love, I'm going to be in self-loving, I'm going to be in self-loving, I'm now also probably going to be in some stillness. So now I'm going to hear that inner voice more. And now we can start to have dialogue. It's just because it's not been visited. That's why it's screaming at you. So lastly, I'm going to talk to you about structure, which again is a bit of a weird one. But firstly, exercise is vital. We have to move our body for the lymph in our systems to move around. And that's what helps us to detox. So those endotoxins, they have to be moved, shifted. We also need to get air in our lungs so we start to feel good. With any kind of cortisol imbalance, however, it's very important not to overdo it. So be careful of running, because the body is running away from saber-toothed tigers. Be a little bit careful of overdoing HIIT classes. So we have two sides to our nervous system. We have our parasympathetic nervous system, which calms us down, helps us unwind, helps us digest, helps us feel frisky, helps us go to sleep. But we also have our sympathetic nervous system, which is our get up and go. And running and HIIT stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. So I'd always say do them in the morning, not at night, and don't do them every day. Be careful. And if you are quite stressed and anxious, don't do them at all. They're the days for yoga, swimming when we're allowed to do that, walks in nature, those things. Lots of low intensity training is great as well. So weights, fantastic. That doesn't necessarily go into the sympathetic nervous system. So we want to make sure that your nervous system's nice and calm. Dancing. Get dancing, get shaking, move your body in different ways and move the energy through. So as soon as you're anxious and you can hear the Osho, the guru of Tantra, says that if you have got voices in your head, you're not moving enough. So it's like he believes in shaking, shaking, shaking. And you see dogs after a fight, as they walk away, as they walk away, they'll just shake. And they're literally shaking stress out their nervous system. So put on some music, shake. If you can hear lots of things in your head, shake your head harder. You might feel bonkers, but you'll feel great. We also know from NLP that posture changes our neural pathways. When we feel low or anxious and we stoop, we actually, we call it, our eyes go down and we actually stimulate negative emotions and negative biochemistry in the brain. By holding our head up and importantly, focusing our eyes up, we actually change our biochemistry. So again, that autonomous adult needs to go, no, today I'm going to eat carefully. I'm going to choose to move my body. I'm going to choose to get outside. I'm going to choose to stand up, even though I just feel really low and I want to do this. I am choosing this. So that's what we can do. And now what I would say we need to avoid. Don't watch the news. It's not your friend. Try and stay high vibe. You will hear the important things because people will tell you. Don't eat crap. This is not the time. Treat yourself with the crap when you've done everything else, Do work really hard. The adult will stop you from doing the numbing. Don't allow the voice to spin off. That's when we have to parent. We go, I hear you, but no thank you. One of my favorite mantras here is, hello, old friend. Thank you, but your opinion isn't welcome right now. If it's spinning out. Okay, I hear you. I hear that there's some sage advice here, but you're not needed right now. So that's the biochemical, the emotional, the electrical, the structural aspects to anxiety and what we can do with them. I really hope that helped, and I would love for you to get involved. So please follow me on Facebook and Instagram, either through my name, Claire Snowdon-Darling Official, or through Balance Wellness UK. Or if you're interested in the training, we now have Functional Wellness UK. To get to the bottom of your physical symptoms, symptomassessor.co.uk. I've got many a page name. If you want to reduce learn how to reduce anxiety, do the self-parenting, the online program Reclaim Your Life is available through Balance Wellness. It is a great program. We also then have a sharing circle for women who are in it. It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And there are lots of ebooks and programs, like I said earlier, and a load of information. We actually have a whole area on our website for free stuff, loads and loads of free stuff. So please do go check it out at balancewellness.co.uk. And thank you so much for listening.